if I had to pick these boards, if I was going to go for the Exway Flex Pro or the Meepo Voyager solely based on the ride of the board, I would hands down be going with the Meepo Voyager. Hey guys, Chris from Average Eskate Reviews here, and today in this video I'm going to be giving you a comparison between the Meepo Voyager and also the Exway Flex Pro. These two boards are arguably some of the best street electric skateboards that you can get to date, or the day that this video was filmed. And now that we've kind of had really good experiences of both, we thought we'd give you our feedback, or I thought I'd give you my feedback on what these two boards are like against each other, if you're trying to figure out which one of these boards you should pick up. Now, I'm going to preface this video by saying, of course, everything you get in this video is going to be based on my experiences in terms of my riding conditions, my weight, my opinions. So just keep that in mind. This has not been influenced in any way, shape or form by either of the manufacturers that were kind enough to send us these boards for these videos. Now, it's probably going to be surprising the kind of like overall, I guess you could say, summary of this video, or the conclusion is going to be. So make sure you watch all the way until the end. And if you're new here, we create electric skateboard comparisons, VS's, reviews, so make sure that you thumbs up, subscribe so you can stay connected with all of the content that we post. And the Instagram channel is going to be down below. It's the best place to reach me if you want to get a quick answer about something, or you want to see what boards we've got at the minute and what we're up to. Now, first things first, I split my videos into categories. The first one we're going to be touching on is going to be speed, which I think is very important. It's where you get the thrill, the enjoyment of riding an electric board. Now, when we look at the Meepo board, which is the Voyager in this case, I'm going to preface this by saying the Meepo is a more powerful board and it does have a bigger battery, but we'll come to that later on in the video, so just keep that in mind. With the Meepo, the advertised top speed that I've seen on various different websites is anywhere from 35, 30 to 40 miles an hour. In terms of what I was able to hit on the board, being a rider that's about 75 to 80 kilograms, the top speed I was getting is about 28 to 31 miles an hour, depending on kind of like where I was riding, how flat it is. So top speed I've been able to get out of the Meepo Voyager board is 31 miles an hour. That's with the stock 90mm wheels. The ones that I have are those crazy purple wheels with lots of different splashes of color on them. But with those particular wheels, I was able to get 31 miles an hour top end. Now, when we look at the Exway Flex Pro, the top speed I was able to get out of that board is 28 miles an hour. But one thing I will mention is I felt like the Exway board had a lot more torque off the line. Even though the Meepo is more powerful and has a bigger battery, just the general torque I was getting off of the Exway, just straight off the line from a dead standstill, was a lot more significant than it was on the Meepo, which also made me kind of think about the hill capabilities of both of these two boards. If you're trying to figure out which one is going to be better at tackling hills, in my experience, it's going to be the Exway Flex Pro over the Meepo Voyager. Now, looking at the range that I was able to get out of these two boards, starting off with the Exway Flex Pro, if you've seen the previous video that I shot, I was getting somewhere between 14 to 18 miles of range, which is pretty accurate. So we can say the Exway Flex Pro in the highest speed mode, riding quite aggressively in a predominantly flat area that's quite windy. Again, 75 to 80 kilograms in body weight on the board. I'm getting roughly about 18 miles of range. Now, that's not going slow, that's not going in slower modes, and at every kind of like traffic light or any occasion where you stop the board, I am fully accelerating. The back wheels are spinning while it's coming off of the line. So we're riding the boards pretty hard, which I feel like is the best way to test them. So if you're not going to be riding a board hard, you can always expect to get more range. If I wanted to get more range out of the Exway Flex, I could just drop down the mode, not be so aggressive with the acceleration curve, but that's not how I want to ride it. So 18 miles of range on the Exway Flex Pro. Now, when we move on to the Meepo Voyager, bear in mind this board does have a bigger capacity battery. The range on this board is going to be somewhere between 24 and 27 miles of range. Again, exactly like what I said about the Exway board, this is in the highest speed setting, riding quite aggressively throughout the city. So that's what you can expect in terms of the range on both of these boards. The Meepo Voyager does have a greater range, but of course it has a bigger battery, so that's always important to mention. In terms of the acceleration on both of these boards, it's going to be pretty straightforward after what you heard me say about the top speed. The Exway Flex Pro, in my opinion, my riding, maybe it's these two boards that I received, despite the Meepo being more powerful, the Exway Flex Pro had better acceleration off of the line. Now that leads really nicely onto braking. It's going to be the same thing again. With my experience, I felt like the Exway Flex Pro had stronger braking than the Meepo Voyager did. Now, of course, this is still like keeping in mind you've got settings in remotes that you can kind of tweak between, but overall, I felt like the Exway Flex Pro had better braking. Now, this isn't to say the Meepo's braking wasn't adequate or it made me feel unsafe. It was just a softer braking board, which is, of course, going to be important for a lot of people out there, but it didn't make me feel like the board wasn't safe. I just felt like the braking was a lot more savage on the Exway Flex Pro than it was on the Meepo. Now, of course, I use the word savage because it was very savage. Sometimes it would be a little bit too strong. And if it's wet outside and you're riding 90mm street wheels that are soft, or rather smooth, and you brake hard and the board really locks those back wheels, that's going to be a nice bit of aquaplaning that you're going to be getting on these boards. So that's definitely worth mentioning. But if you're looking for a board that has the better braking, of course, you know where we're going with that. It was the Exway Flex Pro. Now that leads nicely onto when you've depleted the board's battery, what's the charge time going to be like? With the Exway, it has a fast charger, and realistically, an hour, maybe a little bit over an hour, the board can be from flat all the way back up to 100%, which is pretty insane. I'll put, of course, the exact time that I got on screen. But with the Meepo board, this is, again, quite a big difference. The Meepo board does have a bigger battery, so I do have to mention that. But the charge time on that was plus 3 hours. You know, you're looking at sort of somewhere between 3.5 to maybe 4 hours if the board's completely dead, which is a big, big difference. It'd be great if the Meepo Voyager had a fast charger, but we always do have to remember it is a bigger capacity battery. You are getting essentially 10 miles more range out of the board, so the charge time you can expect to be much higher. Now, this leads us on to one of the most important points, which is going to be the ride. This is something you can't pick up on when you're looking at specs online. You have to kind of get on a board and see what it's going to be like. So hopefully I'll do the best job I can of relaying that to yourselves. Now, with the Exway Flex Pro, if you remember the original video I shot about that board, or the single review we did on that board, the ride was great. It was kind of like reminiscent of riding a boosted board. Now, I do have to say that the Meepo Voyager, if anything, is a much closer comparison to a booster board, with the style that this board has been created in, and of course the shape of the deck, and also the concave of the deck. It's much, much closer to what you'd expect with the booster board Stealth that I had before I kind of got my first Exway board, if you remember the first video we ever posted. Now, saying that, if I had to pick these boards, if I was going to go for the Exway Flex Pro or the Meepo Voyager, solely based on the ride of the board, I would hands down be going with the Meepo Voyager, because it has the type of ride I would want from a street-based board, which is going to be as close to the booster board as possible, but without that really annoying brake reverse thing that it used to do where the wheels will wheel spin every single time you reversed. Essentially, the booster board would go as fast forward as it would backwards, and you didn't have to toggle between the modes. You just pulled the scroll back at any point and the board would go into full speed in reverse, which was great at times, but really horrible at other times. But I digress. Based on the ride of these two boards, the one that is most familiar to a booster board for me is going to be the Meepo Voyager, and that's the one that I'd go for in terms of the ride. I feel like I'm much more comfortable on the board based on the fact that it does have a U-concave, but the U-concave isn't anywhere near as aggressive as the U-concave on the Exway Flex Pro. That U-concave is incredibly deep, and while it's good for carving, just generally riding around with the type of shoes that I wear and my preference on deck shapes, it was uncomfortable for myself if I was going to be on the board for a long period of time. But this is where things get very tricky with these two boards, because although I would pick the Meepo Voyager based on ride, when we move on to the next category, which I'm going to kind of smash into two categories, which is customer service and build quality, that's where I would 100% go with the Exway Flex, and here's why. With the Exway Flex, when you look at the belly of the board, you turn it upside down, you kind of like check it out, you look it over, everything about that board feels premium. I don't know if it's the materials that they're using or the way that they gloss their plastics or the deck that they have. It's hard to put your finger on it, but it's like picking up a Android phone and then picking up the brand new iPhone. Although some would prefer the Android phone, you can't lie and say that the iPhone doesn't feel more premium. Even the unboxing experience, every company's ripped off from Apple because it just works. That's how I feel about these two boards. Although one is adequate and technically more powerful, I would still pick the other one based on the way that these boards feel and look, and of course customer service is what we're going to touch on in a second, but it's not to take away from the Meepo and say that it isn't built well, because it is. And Meepo have really upped their game with the boards that they produce. But when you just look at the base of the Meepo Voyager versus the Exway Flex Pro, the Exway Flex Pro just feels like it's been like one level above. It's like leveled up above what Meepo were creating. And I've said it in previous videos with Exway boards, I feel like they can be VS'd against boards that are much more higher in price point because of how far the company has come. Now, when we look at the customer service, I'm not saying that either of these companies is good at customer service, but if I had to pick, I would say Exway is miles better than Meepo. And this is where things get tricky, because I'm being completely blunt and honest with you guys. I want to review the Meepo Hurricane Bamboo and the Ultra. And I don't know if Meepo are going to collaborate with us based on what we say in this video, but I'm a reviewer that is glad to talk a lot of shit if something irritates me. You guys know this. And as a reviewer who is in contact with Meepo, and Meepo are supplying us with boards occasionally, I can't get an answer out of them with emails if I'm trying to figure out what to do or if I've got an issue with something. And that's insane, because I can make a video about it. And I'm not saying I have the largest audience on YouTube in terms of electric skateboards, but there's a lot of you that watch these videos and listen to what we say. And I can't get an answer out of Meepo when I'm stuck on a question or having an issue. So I can't imagine what anyone out there that's just Joe Blogs from down the street that just bought a Meepo board is experiencing. Now, Exway, I've had issues with them in the past, but I feel like their customer service has really, really improved. If I send them an email, I might not get a response as quickly as like Evolve, for example, who hit back insanely fast. And this isn't me, praising Evolve, but, props where props need to be given. Exway will get back to you. It might take a few days, but I mean, I've emailed Meepo 4 or 5 times, and that's over a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and I've still not heard back, and it's just maddening at this point. You kind of just want to go, fuck it. But it is what it is. If you're trying to figure out which one of these two boards to pick up, based on the ride, I would go with the Meepo Voyager, but based on everything else, I would go with the Exway Flex Pro, because they are a more complete and wholesome company versus Meepo, which is savage to say, but it's the God honest truth. And I hope they'll watch this and sort their shit out, because it's fucking irritating. But that's as blunt and as transparent as I can be in terms of my experience with both of these two boards. Now, saying that the ride on the Meepo is better than the Exway Flex isn't because the board doesn't perform well in terms of the Exway Flex, it's the deck shape. The deck is a little bit shorter, and it is actually wider than the Meepo Voyager, but because the concave on the Exway Flex Pro is so aggressive, when you're not looking down and you're kind of riding, repositioning your feet, the deck feels more narrow, even though it is in fact wider. The Meepo Voyager's deck is a little bit longer than the Exway Flex Pro, which does have an impact on your foot placement on the board and how free you are to move your feet around the board while you're cruising. But it's just the concave. If the deep concave works for you, then the Exway Flex Pro will just be hands down a sick board to have through and through. But I would much prefer a much more gradual concave. I wouldn't want the U concave to be as aggressive, and that's why the Meepo was sort of the deck shape that I would orientate towards. But that's really the only area that I would gravitate towards the Meepo over the Exway. It's just the deck shape, that's it. Rant over. Moving back on, when we look at the overall remotes of both of these two boards, they're both pretty much the same thing, scroll wheels. I always prefer to have a trigger style remote with the deadman switch, because the amount of times I've accidentally accelerated with Exway boards and Meepo boards and either rammed my kitchen cabinet or left burnout marks in my carpet is countless. So I would always prefer a trigger style remote with a deadman switch, but the remotes are both pretty much the same thing. They show you the board percentage, battery percentage, odometers, all of that good stuff. You can go into settings, throw the board into, rather toggle it into reverse if you need to. So the remotes are neither here nor there. The orange Meepo remote for me isn't to my tasting. I would rather prefer having just, a regular blacked out remote like the Exway Flex Pro. But you could throw a case on it. I guess that's not really a big deal, but the remotes are pretty much the same thing. Okay, and last but not least is going to be the price of both of these two boards. The Meepo board is $899 and the Exway Flex Pro is $849. Based on when this video was being filmed, I don't know if promotional dates and when they end is going to affect the pricing. So right now, the Meepo Voyager is a little bit more expensive than the Exway Flex Pro by give or take sort of like $40, $50. But of course that could change based on promotions, so just bear that in mind that the pricing is based on when this video was filmed. So if you're trying to figure out which one of these two boards to pick up, it really is tricky. If you want that slightly longer deck, that deck that feels wider even though it isn't, very, very reminiscent of the Booster board, if so even more reminiscent of the Booster board than the Exway Flex Pro, based on the deck shape, then you kind of want to lean towards the Meepo Voyager, but that's only if you really don't care about customer service. Now, if you want a more complete product, the deeper concave isn't something that bothers you based on your footwear or your riding style and preference, then of course that makes it really easy. Go with the Exway Flex Pro. But in my opinion, if I was spending my money on one of these two boards, it would be ultimately the Exway Flex Pro, because I feel like it's a more complete board. It feels like it's better refined, better built. It's not as powerful as the Meepo Voyager, doesn't have as much range as the Meepo Voyager, but based on my riding style and preference, aside from that deep concave, I just feel like that's the better board to pick up. So if you're trying to figure out which one to pick up, hopefully this video has given you all of the answers that you need to be able to make that happen. And as a side note, something that I've seen going around online right now is about the Meepo Voyager's charging situation, about how a lot of these chargers are faulty. This is apparently an email that Meepo sent out to all of the customers that bought the Voyager, where they said, here's a new charger, but didn't kind of explain that the original chargers were essentially melting the casing of the charging charger itself, like the actual charger brick is the word I'm trying to find. I haven't experienced this, so I can't really comment on it. I'm not going to lie, I've only charged the Meepo Voyager about 1 or 2 times, so I can't really vouch and say I've left it on charge and the same thing's happened for me, but it's something I've seen popping online. And of course, if Meepo have emailed everyone that bought the Voyager, perhaps there is an issue there. I'd recommend looking into that a little bit deeper. And of course, if that doesn't bother you and you want a board that you need to keep in mind, if something goes wrong with it, you're going to have to handle it yourself. It's going to be the Meepo board. But of course, if you want a more complete board, then I'm going to say it's going to be the Exway Flex Pro. But hopefully, guys, this video has given you all of the information that you need to figure out which one of these 2 boards you want to pick up. I've tried to kind of condense this so it doesn't overspill and become like a 35-minute video. But if there's anything that you feel like I've not covered, please make sure you leave a comment down below. Make sure that you follow us on Instagram, subscribe, thumbs up if you like our content and you want to see the next video. And of course, let me know what boards you want me to look at next in terms of a VS video, or if you just want standalone reviews. But thank you guys for watching this video. Thank you for rocking with us, and I will catch you in the next video. Take care.